Thank you so much, Hooch, for pulling me up about comparing Philip Schofield to a Greek or Shakespearean tragedy where everyone dies. Well, I hasten to add, not you said admittedly in a much more vile way in the Greek plays. Actually, I think the most vile tragedy would be would be Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus. Lots of nastiness going on there, but not everybody dies in a Greek tragedy. For example, Oedipus at Colonus. I don't think anybody dies at the end of that, or even during that. Though, what's the name of the villain? Creon. In fact, I played Creon in Oedipus at Colonus years and years ago, and I think I played him a bit like a pantomime villain, so I got booed, which I was rather proud of. But I think I was undermining the dignity of the piece. But yeah, not everybody dies in Greek tragedy. The idea of Greek tragedy and the idea of Shakespearean tragedy is that it's a fall from grace, that you see how somebody is corrupted or somebody is ennobled by suffering. And I'm not sure whether Philip Schofield has been ennobled by suffering. I don't think Eamon Holmes has demonstrated any nobility for his suffering. It's nice to hear that Gary Hutton thinks that Eamon Holmes says that his mother was found Eamon Holmes to be very beautiful and very charming, but she said you should never wash your linen in public. Old Irish, absolutely. Anyway, he got Englified. That's short for, well, you know, they all play the system. But do I want to? Have I been Englified? I suppose I have. But the Greek tragedy is the most wonderful thing. I fell in love with Greek tragedy when I was about 9, and I thought the whole production idea of Greek tragedy was spectacular, because everybody wore these incredibly impressive costumes and high shoes like David Bowie or what's the name with the hair? I can't remember. Elton John, yes. And it was also a religious festival dedicated to the god Dionysus, the god of madness, the god of theatre, the god of wine, the god of the irrational. And there's a great play which is dedicated to Dionysus, the Bacchae, in modern Greek, Vachi. And it's about a man called Pentheus who tries to stop the religion of Dionysus. And religion is often not that understandable. Art is often not that understandable. It's very difficult to rationalize these things. And the Greeks were well aware of that. Hence the Bacchae. You can't explain things, you just have to respect them. And if you don't respect them, all manner of chaos occurs. This is why I think the ephemeral, the unimportant, is something that we should respect. And when you dismiss it, or you try to understand it, you try to explain it, all manner of chaos occurs. And I think that's what we've done with this morning. I think that's what particularly the Catholic Church did with its liturgy in the 1960s. They tried to analyze and understand it. Some things are beyond analysis and beyond understanding. And the same thing about fairy tales and Disney, indeed. Disney, one of the wonderful things about Disney, I'm not a terribly nice man, I believe, but his brilliance in making films was the fact that he didn't explain. It was the fact there was this extraordinary jumble of chaotic conflict. And conflict lies at the heart of great tragedy. But conflict also lies at the heart of great comedy. And if you were in a great comedy, if you were Basil Fawlty in Fawlty Towers, you would think you were living a tragedy, not a comedy. It's only comic because we're observing it. And it's simply the way we observe drama determines whether it's a tragedy or a comedy. And you can make a tragedy of the most insignificant things, and you can make a comedy of the most significant things. It simply depends on your point of view. And the emotional impact, I think, of tragedy was always considered to be greater. I think that's because the ancient Greeks had not experienced the full range of comic potential. I think Rowan Atkinson at his best, I think Mr. Bean is as great as any great production of Oedipus Rex. And I think there are aspects of Fred Astaire, for example, and dance, which are certainly as great as the great Shakespearean tragedies. I think we need to nurture all these different forms of theatre and different forms of expression. And I think television and light entertainment and the morning magazine shows, of which this morning was one, I'm using the past tense, are to be encouraged, and that frothy movement from one subject seamlessly to another. I think actually the greatest champion of that was Blue Peter in its heyday during the 1960s and 1970s, maybe even inching into the 1980s. And there was an extraordinary ease from one topic into another. And I think children's television is a wonderful learning point for both audiences and for performers. And children's theatre in general is a great learning curve. If you can perform for children, that's the hardest audience you're ever going to have. And any form of theatre which has constraints, which has rules, if you obey the rules, you're going to get one result. If you disobey the rules, so for example, that play I was talking about earlier, the Bacchae, disobeyed all the rules. So Aristotle talks about the various rules for putting on a Greek play, and the Bacchae broke all of them. So there we are. And probably the one Greek play which breaks none of the rules and which is perfect was never intended to be performed, and that was written by John Milton in the UK. It was called Samson Agonistes, and it tells the story of Samson, how he brought the temple of the Philistinian god, the Philistine god, down on the heads of the Philistines and killed them all, and himself, of course.